Springs is waking up to a safer city after hundreds of agents across multiple federal agencies helped enforce that raid on the underground nightclub. Investigators say they found drugs, signs of prostitution, and the presence of gangs like Tren de Aragua, MS-13, and the Hells Angels. The video posted by investigators show agents swarming the Colorado Springs nightclub, and it was an after-hours location early Sunday morning. Crowds of people appear to be trying to escape, but videos later show dozens of suspects in handcuffs. More than 300 law enforcement members were involved in the raid of the club.
The FBI arresting a Wisconsin judge on Friday for hiding a previously deported illegal alien in her jury room in order to stop him from being arrested by ICE officials. Milwaukee County Circuit Court Judge Hannah Dugan has been charged with obstruction of an official proceeding after agents tried to arrest Mexican national Eduardo Flores Ruiz. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt reacting to the arrest.
She obstructed federal law enforcement who were looking for an illegal alien in her courthouse. She showed that illegal alien the door to evade law enforcement officials. That is a clear-cut case of obstruction. You don't have to be a lawyer to understand that.
Opening statements began in a second trial for former Memphis police officers who are accused in the beating death of Tyree Nichols. Jeff Manasso with more.
3 former police officers will face an out-of-town jury as their trial begins in Memphis, where they pled not guilty to second-degree murder and other charges in the beating death of Tyree Nichols after a 2023 traffic stop in Memphis that was all caught on body cam. 2 other officers are expected to cop plea deals in the state case. All 5 have already been convicted or pled guilty on federal civil rights violations after the Justice Department concluded that the Memphis PD and the 5 accused former officers who are all black, used excessive force and discriminated against black people. Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
A Colorado father vented his anger to his school board, claiming the school cost him custody of his own daughter. Bronson Woodruff reports.
House Bill 1312 is making its way through Colorado's legislature. It would classify parents as abusive if they don't affirm their child's so-called gender identity. CBN and others report that if it passes, it could result in children being removed from their homes. One father, Dustin Gonzalez, said it's already happening. He lit into the Jefferson County Public School Board of Education earlier in the month, saying his 12-year-old daughter was socially transitioned at school.
My daughter changed her identity, not after years of discussion or family dialogue, not after joint input from both of her parents. No, this happened quickly, secretly, encouraged by a school-appointed therapist and a system that never thought to include me.
He said that by the time he found out, he was already labeled the problem.
You replaced my voice, you stole my seat at the table, and you made decisions about my daughter without me. And Paula Reed, you're in my district. I've heard you're not running again, and if that's true, good. But if you're planning something bigger, if you think higher office is your next move, then let me be crystal clear. I will be your opposition. At every campaign stop, on every ballot, in every debate, you've lost the right to lead. And I'll make sure voters know why. Don't think you can take a man's child from him and not reap a whirlwind. You don't get to raise our children for us, and if those who replace you try as you have, we'll replace them too.
I'm Bronson Woodruff.
Russia announcing a temporary pause to their ongoing invasion of Ukraine. Stephanie Bennett reporting from London.
Posting on Telegram, the Kremlin said the 72-hour truce will start at midnight on May 8th and last until May 11th, which coincides with Russia's 80th anniversary celebrations, marking the end of the Second World War. The Kremlin said that Russia believes that the Ukrainian side should follow this example, and in the event of any violations, Russia will give a proportionate and efficient response, reiterating Russia's willingness to enter peace talks without preconditions. Speaking earlier, the White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt says President Trump has made it clear he wants to see a permanent ceasefire.
While he remains optimistic he can strike a deal, he's also being realistic as well. And both leaders need to come to the table to negotiate their way out of this.
In London, Stephanie Bennett, Fox News.
More news online at afn.net and on the AFN mobile app. I'm Rusty Pugh.
In Denver, Colorado, Jamie Sanchez obeyed the Lord's call and opened the Drip Cafe to create jobs to help unhoused people get back on their feet. Of course, the LGBTQ community began persecuting him for his Christian beliefs. His inspiring story of standing boldly for God's truth in the face of great opposition is part of our Impact series, and we'll send you the DVD as our thanks for your gift to AFA. Visit afa.net/spiritual war. afa.net/spiritual war. We inform.
Religious freedom is about people of faith being able to live out their faith, live out their convictions, no matter where they are.
We equip.
Sacred honor is the courage to speak truth, to live out your free speech.
We also rejoice in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome to The Core here on American Family Radio. Walker Wildmon here with you. Glad to be here on the program on this live edition of At the Core. You're listening to American Family Radio, and there's a litany of opportunities to keep up with the program and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen live 24/7 using the American Family Radio app and AFR.net. Both of those have a live streaming option for the audio here on American Family Radio. If you want to keep up with the program and watch it live, you can go to Facebook, At the Core on Facebook. You can also go to stream.afa.net, stream.afa.net to watch the program live there each and every weekday. And lastly, you can subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. You can subscribe to the podcast, whichever platform you use to podcast, whether it's Apple, Android, Amazon Alexa, Spotify, all the various podcast platforms out there. We're on all of them, and you can click the subscribe button once you search the show. And the latest episode will be in your library each and every day. Let me remind you of a few events, and then we'll jump into our news stories of this segment, and then we've got guests in the second and the third segment. We have our Activate Summit coming up in June, the 12th through the 14th. Registration does end on May 11th. Now, we've already passed the discounted pricing, so you're going to have to pay full price for the Activate Summit, but nonetheless, we still have registration open, and the official cutoff, which I haven't really let you know until now, but the official cutoff is in about 2 weeks on May 11th. Registration will end for the Activate Summit 2025, our first ever Activate Summit. Biblical Bedrock is our theme, building on the authority of Scripture. Once again, the dates are June 12th through the 14th. You can go over to activate.afa.net, activate.afa.net to check out more information on that. We've got a couple events coming up in the fall. In October is a weekend with AFA. That's in the early part of October. That's going to be here in Tupelo, Mississippi. And then at the end of October is AFA at the Ark. So the Ark Encounter Creation Museum, we're going to be back there in the Cincinnati, Ohio area for AFA at the Ark. Let's jump into some of the news stories I want to hit on before we have guests in the next few segments. The Department of Justice, through an order by President Trump, has launched an anti-Christian task force really looking to uncover and expose and stop the anti-Christian bias that exists in the government, specifically in the federal government. So let's listen to the Attorney General Pam Bondi at the first inaugural meeting last week of this anti-Christian task force being headed up by the Attorney General and the Department of Justice. This is going to be clip 2.
We're excited to be here for the launch of the task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias as outlined in the President's executive order. Joining me today are members of the task force and individuals who have been impacted by the anti-Christian bias. Together, this task force will identify any unlawful anti-Christian policies, practices, or conduct across the government, seek input from the faith-based organizations and state governments to end anti-Christian bias, find and fix deficiencies in existing and regulatory practices that might contribute to the anti-Christian bias. As President Trump has stated, the Biden administration engaged in an egregious pattern of targeting peaceful Christians while ignoring violent anti-Christian offenses. The president is right. Biden's Department of Justice abused and targeted Christians. Pro-life Christians were arrested and imprisoned for peacefully praying outside abortion clinics. The FBI spied on traditional Catholics in their parishes. President Biden declared Easter Sunday to be Transgender Day of Visibility. No longer.
Well, there you have it. That's the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. And some of you, you would really have to totally have your head in the sand to think that this is not a problem, talking about anti-Christian bias. But for those of you out there who just haven't been paying attention, this is a problem. This is a systemic, embedded problem within the federal government where there's been this culture of against Christianity. And you can see what happened under Biden, where you had the FBI surveilling Catholic churches. You had the FBI surveilling Christian parents at school board meetings. You had the FBI and the Department of Justice targeting pro-lifers that were peacefully protesting on the sidewalks outside of abortion clinics, and just throwing the book, everything, every single charge possible being thrown at Christians around the country under the Biden administration. I mean, it was open war on people of faith. And on a similar note, we saw a lot of the similarities with Jewish people in our country, with Jews in America. When on these college campuses, Jews didn't feel safe going to class, that they were shouting Muslim, anti-Jew rhetoric on college campuses. So a lot of this is coming to an end, and this task force is going to help stop a lot of this anti-Christian bias that exists in the federal government. Now remember that this stuff doesn't happen overnight. We didn't get to this place where Christians were penalized in the federal government overnight. This took a lot of time. Obama started this, and Biden really saw it a step farther with his executive agencies and his executive branch having really a zero tolerance policy for people of faith. And so President Trump is putting that to an end through the Attorney General. And we'll continue to update you on that and some of their findings with that task force. Another thing I wanted to mention, we're heading into the 100th day of President Trump's presidency, and it feels like it's been about 6 months, but it's only been 3 months, not even 3 months, and or a little over 3 months. And the 100th day is actually tomorrow. And the White House is basically taking people through the first 100 days. And the amount of work that has been done is absolutely phenomenal, specifically looking at the border numbers. Remember, Biden opened, we talked about this last week, Biden opened our border to everybody and their mom and their brother and their third cousin and then their neighbor from every country, not just in Central and South America, Mexico, but all around the world. You had people just pouring into our border, and the Department of Homeland Security, through Customs and Border Patrol, they were really being forced to, poor agents, I feel bad for them, and I'm not denigrating the profession, but they were being forced to facilitate a mass human smuggling operation. That's what was happening here. And it was under the guise of processing illegal immigrants, but they were making it easy to enter our country illegally, and they were facilitating one of the largest, if not the largest, human smuggling operations in world history. 10 million people smuggled into America in 4 years, and President Trump has just cut the spigot off. One of the shocking numbers that you're going to hear in this clip is President Biden. Remember, Biden, through the Department of Homeland Security, through Customs and Border Patrol, they were releasing hundreds of thousands of illegals into our country. So they were processing them, doing their fingerprints. These are the ones that they apprehended. There's hundreds of thousands that they didn't even apprehend. Then they were releasing them into the homeland, into the interior. Well, President Trump has cut off that policy. He's completely stopped it. And there, in roughly 98, 100 days, there's only been 9 releases into the interior. 9 releases into the interior. Under Biden, there were hundreds of thousands of releases into the interior. Let's listen to clip 3. This is the White House on it.
Speaking of Joe Biden, it was his awful open border policies that recklessly allowed more than 10 million illegal aliens to invade the United States over the past 4 years. Innocent Americans like Laken Riley, Jocelyn Nungray, Rachel Morin, and so many others were viciously murdered at the hands of these illegal aliens as a result of Biden's dereliction of duty. That's why one of President Trump's central campaign promises was to secure the border and end this invasion. In just under 100 days, 99 now to be exact, the president has overwhelmingly delivered on that promise. America's borders are now secure because of President Trump. He has restored the rule of law, enforced our immigration laws, and defended America's sovereignty. The president immediately declared a national emergency on the southern border, deployed the U.S. military and Border Patrol to repel the invasion, and ended reckless catch-and-release policies. The results have been nothing short of extraordinary. Between President Trump's inauguration and April 1 of this month, only 9 illegal aliens were released into the United States, a staggering 99.99% decrease from the more than 184,000 illegal aliens who were released into the country under Biden during the same period last year. The number of unaccompanied illegal alien children arriving at the border has also hit a record low. Total attempted illegal crossings at the southwest border hit a record low in February, only to fall to another new record low again last month in March. Just listen to these incredible numbers. In March 2024, under Joe Biden, Border Patrol encountered approximately 140,000 illegal aliens at the southwest border. 1 year later, in March 2025, under President Trump, Border Patrol encountered just over 7,000 illegal aliens at the southwest border. That's another 95% decrease from the prior year.
There you have it. Those are just the sheer numbers, folks. And as I said before, and I'll say it again because it's worth repeating, this was 100% on Biden. Under his 4 years of the disastrous open border policy, that can only be described as an anti-American policy. I mean, when you look at it, there's nothing good about it. There's absolutely nothing good about it. And Tom Homan, who's the border czar, listen to what he had to say. This is a quote. When 96% less people are coming across the border, how many women aren't being sexually assaulted by the cartels? How many children aren't dying making the journey? How many women and children aren't being sex trafficked into this country? How many known and suspected terrorists aren't making it into this nation? And how many pounds of fentanyl isn't getting into this country to kill young Americans? Biden told us in front of the cameras on national television that the border was a complicated problem and he just had to get Congress involved. Without Congress, he can't do anything, he said. My hands are tied, he said. President Trump comes in and drops the catch and release numbers by 99.99% from 184,000 people in a 90-day window last year caught and released at the southern border, 184,000 during the same 3-month window under Trump. 9 were released into the country under President Trump. So this is staggering and infuriating. And here we have, with some of these policies and some of this political talk, it's hard to get good comparisons. It's hard to get apples to apples. But here we literally have, within a 12-month window, Biden, 3 months of Biden, early 2024, 3 months of President Trump, early 2025, and numbers to compare one against another, and drastic improvement at the southern border. Because the Customs and Border Patrol and the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, both of them able to actually do their job, not having their hands tied behind their back, and that's what's happening under President Trump. So the American people, yes, they ought to be relieved that the border is under control, but they also ought to be infuriated that that was allowed to happen for 4 years. The damage that has been done is going to be very difficult to reverse. Some of it is actually irreversible when you look at the lives lost by the cartels and otherwise. Very, very infuriating. And that's why the election in last November was such an overwhelming majority, is because of the frustration with the last 4 years. We'll be back in a few.
Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go forth from your country, and from your relatives, and from your father's house, to the land which I will show you." My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. Genesis 12 begins with God calling Abram to leave Haran, his relatives, and all that was comfortable and familiar to him, and directing him to the promised land. One of the first things Abram encounters in the promised land is famine. When God directs us, we should never assume his will comes without difficulty. However, the presence of difficulty doesn't nullify God's direction. Our faithfulness to him should never be determined by surrounding circumstances. When God calls, follow him. Rejoicing follows obedience.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
Do you believe in the absolute inerrancy of God's holy word? Do you believe in the power of the Holy Spirit to radically change lives and empower us to live like Christ? At Wesley Biblical Seminary, we believe God is raising up a movement of people across our nation and across the world who hold fast to the authority of the Bible and the hope of holiness. We are working today to equip tomorrow's pastors and Christian leaders through biblical and theological education and practical ministry that's accredited, affordable, online, and highly personal. Our programs include undergraduate, master's, and doctoral degrees, certificate programs, and even training for lay people. So whatever your next step is in being equipped for ministry, we're here for you. And if you believe these are the kinds of pastors we need leading our churches in the future, we invite you to learn more about partnering with us through giving. Learn more about Wesley Biblical Seminary by visiting us at wbs.edu today.
We live in a day when America's families are under attack like never before.
Buddy Smith, Senior Vice President of the American Family Association.
The war against biblical principles rages on numerous fronts: the internet, Hollywood, Washington, D.C., America's corporate boardrooms, and the list goes on. At American Family Association, we're committed to standing against the enemies of God, the enemies of your family. And we recognize it's an impossible task without God's favor and your partnership. Thank you for being faithful to pray for this ministry, to give financially, and to respond to our calls for activism. What you do on the home front is crucial to what we do on the battlefront. We praise God for your faithfulness, and may He give us many victories in the battles ahead as we work together to restore our nation's biblical foundations.
At the Core podcasts are available at afr.net. Now, back to At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to the program here on American Family Radio. Walker Wildmon here with you on the show. Well, here shortly, we're going to jump to our first guest for the program today. We're going to be talking to Georgia Secretary of State Raffensperger about some of the election law and election regulations in the state of Georgia, and also some other topics as well. Let's jump straight to our guest, Georgia Secretary of State Raffensperger. Welcome to the program.
Glad to be here.
Well, let's first talk about Georgia elections, because obviously as Secretary of State, that's under your purview with the powers delegated by the legislature. But in recent years, specifically after the November 2020 election, the state legislature really got in there and made some fixes, if you will, to how Georgia's elections are carried out. And of course, you've had a couple of different elections take place, both statewide and federal, since the legislature jumped in there and the governor and did some revisions to the election law. So tell us kind of where you are today and how confident you feel about Georgia's elections.
Thank you. Well, Georgia has a great story to tell. If you look at the last several years, with the Election Integrity Act of 2021, which was SB 202, well, first off, I have to point out that Stacey Abrams made up all sorts of stuff about what the law did, and it didn't do any of what she was alleging. We actually have had record registrations, record turnout. But number one is we had photo ID for all forms of voting. So if you vote absentee now in Georgia, it was based on photo ID the same forms of identification that we use for in-person voting. We are a Real ID compliant state. And we partnered with the Department of Driver Services for over 15 years now. Because we are Real ID compliant, we virtually have eliminated the possibility of having non-citizens from ever voting in our state. In fact, I've done 2 citizenship audits since 2021 to verify that only American citizens are voting, because only American citizens are on the voter list. Number 2, we finally had put into law accountability for the counties, because counties ran the election, but there was no direct accountability measure. No one could fire them. No one could put them under review. So we finally gave the state election board that authority, so you can make sure that the counties were running a smooth, fair, accurate election. And we've seen great improvement from some of the counties who had struggled in the past. We also put into state law that the lines had to be shorter than 1 hour. We think that voters show up to vote. We should respect their commitment and keep those lines shorter than 1 hour. And then we tracked it. We tracked it really beginning in 2022. The average wait time was 3 minutes. And in 2024, average wait time was 2 minutes. We've actually now, since then, we passed another measure in 2023 with Senate Bill 189, which said that all the early voting, and we have 17 days of early voting in Georgia, all of that voting that happens before Election Day has to be reported 1 hour after the polls close. All the absentee voting has to be reported 1 hour after the polls close. In Georgia, that's 80% of all the vote totals were started being uploaded on our site on election night. So it was very, very fast. And as Jonathan Turley said on election night on Fox News, Georgia and Florida run the best elections in the entire country. And we've actually been ranked number 1 or number 2 by Heritage Foundation for the past several years. It's either us or Tennessee who are number 1. We trade jockey back and forth, 1 and 2. We're really proud of that. We're really proud of that achievement because at the end of the day, it's about voter trusting the process, also having a great time when they vote because they're not standing in lines for a long period of time. And right now, UGA did a poll after the last election. And when their poll was done, they said that came out that 94% of all Georgians trusted our process, trusted their poll workers. And we think that's really very important when you have a polarized society.
Absolutely. Once again, we're talking to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger about a Georgia election law and Georgia election processes. One more question about elections, and then I do want to go on to a recent statement you put out regarding some of the Afghan Christians and the deportation plans or removal plans. But before we move to that topic, the subject of ranked choice voting, we've tried to cover this as often as we can on the program, and it gets a little convoluted. It's definitely not easy to understand, which is red flag number 1. But Alaska does this, and a few other states do what's called ranked choice voting. And it's this convoluted process of basically process of elimination through multiple stages where you end up with a couple individuals on the final ballot to be chosen by the voters. But what's your position on that? Because a lot of Democrats want to go this direction, and everywhere where they've deployed it, it's very confusing for the voters when you try to ask the voters, hey, what is ranked choice voting, or how would you go about it? Very difficult to articulate. So what's your position on this so-called ranked choice voting?
I think that what we found is that there's really no appetite in the General Assembly to move it forward. I understand that what people are thinking, that they'll get better outcomes. At the end of the day, Georgia has an open primary. And what we really found is that we're getting great choices in the November races. That we have people that there's a choice on the left, and there's a choice on the right, and it just so happens that most of the time, statewide, it's the people on the right are winning because this state is a center-right state. I just don't see it changing here in Georgia. I think that we'll continue to do what we're doing. It seems to work well for us.
You put out a statement recently, a letter rather, to the Department of Homeland Security regarding some of the removal plans or potential plans for removal for some Afghan Christians. What's your position on that, and what's the essence of the letter? Summarize it for us, please.
Well, briefly stated, these people are twofold. They're people, Afghanis, that stood alongside the U.S. military, risking their life to really allow us to be able to get our message out and really help defend America's interest after 9/11. We were looking for bin Laden, and these people came alongside of us at great risk to their lives. Then after Biden, his hastily withdraw, and I'm being charitable by saying that. It was probably one of the biggest embarrassments of American history. But it was so haphazardly done. But many of these people were left behind that, exfiltrated afterwards. These people stood with the U.S. military. If we don't stand with them now, what happens if we ever had a situation in some other country down the road and the locals come alongside of us, and then as we're leaving, they feel that they need, safe harbor someplace. If we don't stand with these folks, we won't find people in the future that will stick their neck out to come alongside our military, provide a very valuable service to save American soldiers' lives. And number two, they're Christians. And this is the Taliban is not friendly to Christians. Let's call it like it is. And so these are Christians. I'm a Christian. You're a Christian. And I think that we need to stand together. These are people of faith. And I just think that they'd be facing torture, imprisonment, and potential death. And because the Taliban has not changed. They may say they've changed. At the end of the day, the skunk doesn't change its stripe. And so they're going to come back to their form at some point in time once they somehow move through this situation. And so I just asked for a 90-day pause. Let's really do a deep dive on this. These are Christians, and they're also people that stood with our U.S. military. So in both cases alone, I think it would warrant a 90-day pause to really do a deep dive and review of this.
Yeah, and this is, when you look at America's immigration laws and policies, this is like Exhibit A of how it should be used, meaning giving some type of temporary asylum or refugee status to people who face genuine threat based either on their religious beliefs or their ideology or political viewpoints. And unfortunately, we've had this kind of catch-all approach to giving everybody asylum, or at least assuming everybody qualifies for asylum, which goes back to this whole catch and release and President Biden's temporary protected status, which I would argue is illegal, and the president can't just unilaterally give everybody temporary protected status who's here illegally. But in this case, these are Afghan nationals that were brought over here during the withdrawal or prior to the withdrawal, or otherwise have made it over here. And they do face genuine threat. They face genuine threat over in Afghanistan because the Taliban is still in charge, unfortunately. And to your point, many of them, if not all, helped our troops and helped our dignitaries and helped U.S. allies on the ground there in Afghanistan. So we'll keep tracking this and see what Kristi Noem and the Department of Homeland Security have to say about it. Once again, we've been talking to Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger out of Georgia. Secretary, before we wrap it up, I didn't even tell you I was going to ask you this, but what are some things that your office is working on? The Secretary of State does several things at the state level, but other than elections, what are some things that you guys are working on that you would like to see done differently or better in the state of Georgia before we let you go?
Well, we also register corporations, and I implemented a bill that I introduced when I was in the State House. We passed that my last year in the House, became Secretary of State. You can now renew your corporation for up to 3 years, 1, 2, or 3 years, and 25% of all Georgians are using the multi-year option. So we're trying to be a pro-business state. We always have been. And what can we do to really further the strong business climate that we have in Georgia? We just got passed House Bill 579, which is licensing reform. We're trying to reduce barriers on hardworking Georgians that require a professional license, be it a hairdresser, a cosmetologist, barber, electrician, plumber, architect, geologist, whatever it is. And so we've got two things in there that are very important. Number one is that we can administratively issue a license when the board doesn't meet as often as it needs to. We just go ahead, you've done all the paperwork. We can issue that without requiring that board. Number two, the governor does put all these board members on the board. And if one goes rogue or one goes asleep on the job and just doesn't do their job, he had no legislative, no legal process of removing them. We believed he should have the authority, and this bill gave him the authority, and we think that's a good thing. So it's more accountable to hardworking Georgians.
Absolutely. And we've got a lot of listeners, thousands of listeners in Georgia, multiple radio signals there throughout the state. So those folks are listening now. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger has been our guest today. Secretary of State, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So there you have it. That's the Georgia Secretary of State on a couple of different items: election integrity, election law, what his office is doing on that front. Also, the Afghan Christians that are in our country under a temporary status, temporary refugee or temporary asylum status there. and what to do with that situation as the Trump administration begins to weigh out all of our options. And on that note, let me just say this: there are so many people in our country illegally. There are so many people in our country illegally. At this point, looking at removing Afghan Christians should be towards the bottom of the list for the Trump administration. As far as the list of priorities, we've got 10 million just in the last 4 years. We've let in 10 million illegal immigrants through the southern border. And we haven't even put a dent in that through deportations and removals. And the reason is number one, there's a capacity issue. But number two, you've got these court cases tying President Trump's hands behind his back. And we've got to get through that. We've got to get through this lawfare. And the Supreme Court's going to have to step in here and give the president his rightful authority, his rightful duty to deport illegal immigrants. Also, we also need to have the conversation, and we need to have this conversation sooner rather than later. But there's this assumption in our talking points. There's this assumption as we discuss the issue of illegal immigration that, well, only those who have committed crimes while in America or committed violent crimes in America or committed murder, for example, only those should be deported. Well, that's not a legal and constitutional argument. That might be an emotional argument, but that's not a legal and constitutional argument. If you come into this country illegally, you're eligible for deportation. You're eligible for deportation immediately according to the laws on the books. So I think we need to start having this conversation about what do we do with people that are here illegally. Maybe they haven't committed a felony since they've been here in the States, but nonetheless, they're non-citizens. They're not legal citizens here. And they went through the process by avoiding the process and crossing the border illegally. And they should be eligible and on the table for deportation as well. And I know that Tom Homan has stated such, and I'm glad he did. But the rest of the White House and the executive branch needs to make it clear that every illegal immigrant is eligible for deportation. You don't have to be a murderer or a drug trafficker to be eligible for deportation. Everyone is eligible for deportation. Another way that this is going to impact our future as a country is this is more of a secondary issue and not the primary issue, but the economics of illegal immigration they're not justified. You know, a lot of the talking points you'll get from the Democrats, and this really shows their lack of knowledge and lack of depth on the issue. But they'll say, well, who's going to work these jobs? Who's going to work these blue collar jobs? Who's going to work on these agricultural jobs? Which, number one, is rather degrading and dehumanizing to draw a conclusion that the only jobs that Latinos or other immigrants are good for is agricultural jobs. I mean, if we were to say that about any other ethnic group, we would be called racist and demeaning and every other name in the book. But that's what the Democrats do. But America's headed into a very high-tech manufacturing period in our country where there's going to be more robots, more high-tech, and less actual workers needed to get the job done. Now, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of labor need out there, but it's not going to be near what it was maybe during the Industrial Revolution. And so my point in saying that is the whole argument that we've got to have all these immigrants, whether legal or illegal, for jobs is just not going to be the case. That's just not going to be the case in the future because of how the economy is changing and how manufacturing is changing. So that's going to be a problem too that the administration is going to have to work through. And that is, what do you do with all these immigrants, both legal and illegal, that are here to work, that are beginning to not have jobs because the economy is changing and the way we manufacture and the way we produce crops, all of that is changing, and the labor's needs just aren't there like they used to be. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that. All right, folks, At the Core, we'll be back in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
I'll do some stand-up comedy. Abe will do some preaching. Tim will MC the whole thing, and I'm really excited about it. The Weekend with AFA is a chance for our supporters to get better acquainted with the people and ministry you're supporting.
It's a Weekend with AFA, Thursday, October 2nd through Saturday, October 4th in Tupelo, Mississippi. Speakers will include Abraham Hamilton III, Jenna Ellis, Tim Barton, Tim Wildmon, and more. Register at afa.net/weekend. Some chances come along once in a lifetime. When they do, you've got to be ready. AFA Action's Center for Judicial Renewal has such a chance to help the Trump administration make good choices, nominating men and women as Supreme Court justices and other federal judges. Your gift helps make that possible, and we'll give you a free Bible study by Stephen McDowell, God's Blueprint for Life, Liberty, and Property, as a thank you gift. Visit afaaction.net today. afaaction.net.
The following is not an actor, but a real-life story from Trinity Debt Management.
I'm Claire from Trinity Debt Management. I'm a counselor, and the reason that I love working for Trinity is because I get to help folks with one of the hardest problems a family can face, and that's financial difficulties. In this day and age, everything is going up. You have higher utilities, higher grocery bills, higher fuel, and those credit card interest rates have gone up as well. We can help you with that. We can help you get lower interest rates, lower monthly payments. In just a few minutes, we put together a plan that gets you out of debt and keeps you out of debt. I love my job. It's a great program and a very smart way to find debt relief.
If credit card debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
I'm Claire, a Trinity counselor. Call me and become debt-free for keeps.
1-800-788-1813.
Hey friends, it's Jessica Peck, Dr. Nurse Mama, as your 1-minute parenting coach. What word or phrase did your parents use often while you were growing up that you intentionally avoid yourself as a parent? I'm talking about things like, "What were you thinking?" or "Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about," or the ultimate classic, "Because I said so." The power of our words is the most deadly weapon and the most protective force we have as parents if we use it well. I challenge you to ask your kids about your frequent words and phrases. If it's hurtful, give yourself grace and space. Kids are amazingly forgiving with a sincere apology. Affirm your growth and be kind and gracious to yourself as you unlearn and relearn. I'll see you on the Dr. Nurse Mama radio show right here on American Family Radio.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio with your host, Walker Wildman.
Welcome back to the program. Third segment now underway here on American Family Radio. Once again, I'm Walker Wildman. We would love for you to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Just type in the name of the program, At the Core, click the subscribe button, and the show will be queued up in your library each and every day. Another thing I want to mention before we jump to our guest is the various spiritual heritage tours that we're offering coming up this fall and into early next year. A few of them specifically, we have our annual Washington, D.C., Williamsburg tours that are coming up. June's already full, but the next one will be in September. I'll be there. My brother Wesley will be there as well. Boston is a brand new trip that we're taking in October. We're going to do the Freedom Trail. We're going to go to Plymouth Rock. We're going to go to John Adams' home in State Park. We're going to do the Mayflower replica. There's a lot we're going to do there in Boston, for about 4 or 5 days. And then lastly, I'll mention Greece and Israel. Greece would be Footsteps of Paul. Israel is the Holy Land, of course, the land of the Bible. We're going to do both of those in early 2026. So go to wildmangroup.com and check those out. All right, I want to introduce our next guest, who's also my colleague. Trey Dellinger's with us. He's a senior legal fellow over at AFA Action, which is our governmental affairs affiliate. And Trey works with our team there on policy and legislation for states and even at the federal level. Trey, welcome to the program.
Hi, Walker. Great to be with you.
Well, Trey, one thing that you guys, there's a lot that you work on with Jamison Taylor on the policy and legislative front. But a lot of folks don't know all the stuff that you guys do. I mean, you're mostly behind the scenes. Occasionally, you'll write op-eds or do media interviews. But I want to highlight, before we jump into kind of the nuts and bolts, I want to highlight the work that you guys do. It's just so excellent and praiseworthy and noteworthy, but not everybody knows what's going on. But we're doing a lot of work in the legislative realm and the policy realm to protect and defend America's families. And on that front, Trey, let's start off with our age verification legislation. This has been actually passed in multiple states. It's currently being litigated right now. But give us a little backgrounder on what exactly is age verification legislation.
Yeah, that was a wave of legislation, sort of refer to that as the first wave of anti-pornography, anti-obscenity legislation that we've had in the 21st century era. That goes back to federal legislation that passed in the late 90s that required users that access websites that contain pornographic content to verify that their users are adults. So that people under 18, kids, are not accessing this kind of content. The first wave of that was federal legislation, again, that passed in the late 90s. The pornography industry challenged that before the Supreme Court, which unfortunately was struck down by a narrow 5-4 majority in the early 2000s, tragically, in an opinion that was not well reasoned and not well decided. And because of the more conservative makeup of the court that we have now, states decided that they would try again. And then in the last several years, we've had a wave of age verification legislation that passed in the states, beginning with Louisiana and then Mississippi and Texas. And ultimately, about 19 states passed this legislation requiring commercial websites that have pornographic content to verify that users are actually adults before they can access that kind of harmful content.
Yeah, the states have had laws on the books for some time now stating that you have to be an adult. You have to be 18 years or older to view pornography. And it used to be where it was almost like this honor system. And that's actually not a good word for this subject, but it was somewhat of a, it was a wild, wild west, basically, where there was no accountability, where minors had access to pornography. All they had to do was say they had to lie, basically, and they're already doing something that they shouldn't be doing, so lying's not a problem. And they would say, yeah, sure, I'm 18, and then they would have access to pornography just like that in a split second. But these age verification bills that are now laws, as you mentioned, in over 19 states, what I like about them, not only the purpose behind them is noble, it's right, it's virtuous, but it actually has teeth to it. I mean, these are actual verification features that are causing some porn providers to shut down their IP addresses in various states. So talk about the enforcement mechanism, if you will.
Yeah, many of the what I call that first wave in the 21st century of age verification legislation, which kind of differentiates it from the federal legislation that came in the late 1990s. Most of that state-based legislation for age verification imposed civil penalties that could be instituted by the Attorney General. That's the approach that Texas took, or some states like Louisiana and Mississippi created a civil cause of action so that private individuals could go retain an attorney. And if they're harmed or had a child that's harmed by this material or exposed to this material, they can get a private attorney and sue the commercial website and get substantial money damages. It's a little bit like the approach that was taken with the tobacco industry. For years we tried to regulate that through the FDA, and that never really worked. But private lawyers are such a force multiplier that using them can really make a difference. So that's the model that Louisiana, Mississippi, and some other states have used is civil liability. We think that holds great promise for age verification and the obscenity legislation that we'll talk about before we're done.
Yeah, on that note, before we move to the obscenity legislation, which for those who don't know, and this is a topic that unless you're kind of in the field of protecting minors and protecting families and in the field of studying this pornography epidemic that we have, it's a lot of people don't know this terminology, but obscenity and pornography are not necessarily the same thing from a legal vantage point, and the law actually differentiates between the two. But before we move on to that, Trey, I wanted you to speak to this false notion and this false legal theory that has permeated for decades that for some reason that the First Amendment protects pornography, the First Amendment protects obscenity, etc. Talk about how that's not how our founding fathers viewed this issue.
Sure. Well, the founding fathers certainly would be shocked at the notion that sexually graphic content was protected by the First Amendment. That certainly was not the original understanding of the text of the First Amendment. Sexually graphic publications were not legal under English common law that goes all the way back to the 1600s and 1700s, which kind of laid the foundation that of law and legal understanding that the founders operated in. That was the atmosphere that they operated in, was set by the English common law. And so you can tell this from the contemporaneous activities that happened at the time. Connecticut passed an anti-sexual publication law that outlawed obscene speech in 1808, less than 10 years, approximately 10 years after the ratification of the First Amendment. So, that makes clear that and it was never challenged. That makes clear that the First Amendment was never intended to address that kind of material. And other states quickly followed. And by the time of the Civil War period, over 20 states had passed state-based legislation that outlawed these sort of sexually graphic publications. And then you had the federal Comstock legislation in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War that made this type of content illegal under federal law. And all the way up through at least the 1940s Supreme Court decision in the Shaplinsky case, the Supreme Court recognized that the lewd and obscene had never been considered protected speech. The court said that that kind of content contributed nothing to the contest of ideas, which is what the First Amendment was intended to protect. The First Amendment was intended to protect rational argument, an appeal to the mind, not an appeal to the urges of the body, which is what pornography is. The founders would be shocked, absolutely shocked, that people are now trying to misuse and misconstrue the First Amendment to protect this kind of material. Now, for clarification, I should add, as you noted, unfortunately, later decisions of the Supreme Court began to protect what they call pornography, but they said that obscenity, which is a particular legal definition, is not protected by the First Amendment. And kind of a layperson's idea of understanding that is the really, really hardcore pornography qualifies as obscenity and does not get First Amendment protection. The Supreme Court established that in the early 1970s, and that has been in place for more than 50 years, that obscenity and child pornography are not protected speech.
On the obscenity topic, you and by the way, the history of AFA working on this topic goes back to my grandfather in the late 70s, early 80s. He was a leader in this movement against pornography. Absolutely. And against obscene material at that time on cable television and in magazines and on bookshelves. But before we wrap up, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. Trey, tell us the latest legislation that you and Jameson and others helped shepherd through the Mississippi legislature that the governor signed just last week on obscenity and the civil right of action. Give us an update on that.
Right. We've been very blessed with good results there in Mississippi this last session. I want to thank Representative Price Wallace for authoring and taking the lead on passing House Bill 599 in Mississippi. That creates a civil cause of action, so people who are harmed by child pornography or obscenity can sue these big porn companies and get damages. And we want to say that message is we don't want this stuff in Mississippi, and we think we're making headway there. Representative Joey Hood and Senator Bryce Wiggins, who are the chairman of the two respective committees in the Mississippi House that shepherded that, I want to give thanks to them, and Lieutenant Governor Hoseman and Speaker White. They really did yeoman's work to push that legislation through. You would think that this would be common sense and easy, but anybody that's worked in legislation knows there's no easy legislation that you can pass, and we want to thank them for their leadership there.
Yeah, and these big porn providers and these really host of obscene material, they have massive lobbying dollars, and they even hide behind the facade of free speech, if you will. And in Texas, for example, the party that is suing the attorney general there over their age verification legislation is called the Free Speech Coalition. Well,
right.
That sounds good, right? Free Speech Coalition. But if you ask people, do you think, free speech includes obscene and pornographic material? They would go, probably not, or they would object to that term.
Yeah, the Free Speech Coalition is just a euphemism for the pornography industry. That's all it is.
Yeah, exactly. And they're hiding behind that name. But Trey, this is, there's a lot of momentum here. And people have been victimized, not just children, which is our primary purpose in some of this legislation, is to begin to protect minors, but then, of course, work our way up and protect adults as well, because across the board, these the data, not just morally speaking, is it reprehensible, it's wrong, it's immoral, but the data is on the side of us as well. I mean, the damage that pornography does to the mind and the body and the heart and the soul is very, very bad. And you can look at divorce rates for people who get hooked on pornography. You can look at all the trauma that people go through, women that are victimized. I mean, the list goes on. Trey,
absolutely
appreciate your work on this topic, and thanks for coming on and talking with us.
Thanks for having me today, Walker.
Absolutely.
Always good to talk to you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Trey. That's Trey Dellinger, our senior legal fellow over at AFA Action. And for those who don't know, AFA Action is the governmental affairs affiliate of American Family Association. We're working day in and day out over at AFA Action in the policy realm and the legislative realm in states all around the country on these very, very important topics. And we've made a lot of headway on this topic of pornography and obscene material. And this is the ignored epidemic, I'll tell you. This is the epidemic that is ignored. And the big government bureaucrats want to talk about all these other problems like so-called climate change, and they want to talk about all the other parts of our life and aspects of our life that they should regulate, but they're completely ignoring, I'm talking at the federal level, they're completely ignoring the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is a pornography epidemic. And when you look at the data on this, and this is not just coming from Christians, folks, or people of faith, this is coming from the social science realm. The epidemic of pornography is just tearing this country apart. It's tearing this country apart. You look at the addiction data, you look at the marriage issues that arise from this, you look at even the sociological and psychological damage that is done through pornography, folks. It is bad news. And, the left and the Marxists like to use this word victimless crime or victimless activity, or, a lot of the libertarians want to say, what other adults do in the privacy of their homes shouldn't affect you, folks. How we conduct ourselves and what we put into our mind does affect us, and it affects all of society, and pornography is no exception. Thanks so much for joining us, folks. Thanks for joining At the Core here on American Family Radio. We'll see you next time.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.